Hey everybody, sorry it took me so long to come back and put up a regular video. I had a couple that I was working on and doing some research for, and then everything happened with the debate with Biden, and as things have rolled along, I've moved my attention to that, put the other things on the back burner, the stuff that I was working on for this channel. I was initially planning to use note cards because it's such a big subject, there's so much to talk about, and that's why I haven't actually put a video up yet, because I've been refining my argument, and I actually put together a really well organized presentation as far as what I want to say on this, but I tried to do it and it was way too long. And I saw that it was too long, but I thought I'll just keep recording it and cut out the parts that I don't need. But then I ran out of space on my phone. So I'm going back to plan A, which is to just make the video without note cards. So hopefully it won't end up being too rambly. So I think we're getting, despite, the attempts by the Biden administration and the Biden campaign to project confidence, I think we're getting into the range where the fact that this conversation is still going on, and not only is still going on, but is getting louder, is an indication that we're probably going to eventually get to the place where Biden steps down. And I think that that would be a good thing. I think that the polling that has been done shows that, basically any generic Democrat does much better against Trump than Biden does. Harris does better against Trump than Biden does, in the polling that I've seen, for what it's worth, which is, only so much. I know a lot of people are upset about the fact that people want to have this conversation, and I can understand why you feel like it's not fair to, talk about Biden's faults when there are so many faults on the other side in his opponent. But the fact is, this conversation, the one about whether or not he should step down as the candidate, is not about Biden versus Trump. It's about Biden versus, this incredibly large, deep bench of seasoned politicians that the Democratic Party has. And I think it's fairly clear that Biden is not up to this, and that there are a lot of other people who would do much better, or at least would have like an even playing field as far as like, having a chance. Biden is just underwater so much, and some of it is unfair. Some of it is, just the standard polarization. Some of it is his wins not breaking through the news cycle, and people just having totally tuned out politics long ago because of how toxic and vicious it has gotten in the Trump era. Those people are not going to hear about things like what the Biden administration did with the strategic oil reserves, selling when oil was like $90+ a barrel, and making a whole boatload of money for the United States Treasury, and then refilling it when the price of oil was low. His success with OPEC on the same topic. That's the kind of thing, that it drives me crazy to hear people say that they're voting for Trump because they want the gas prices to go down, when in reality, if they would have heard about that, they would know that there's not much that a president can really do about gas prices, but to the extent that they can do anything, Joe Biden has been much better at it, or his administration has been better at delivering on those things than really any previous administration in my lifetime that I can remember. So, but there's not really much you can do about that. The real issue is that Biden has major weaknesses that aren't actually directly related to the communication problems, and that goes to answering the question of why was it so close even before the debate, despite how flawed Biden's opponent is. And, the fact of the matter is, the Democratic Party has basically embraced a strategy, big picture strategy, for many election cycles now of trying to appeal to undecided moderates and making the assumption that anybody, left of center in the electorate is not going to have another viable option but to vote for them. And they've actually gone out of their way to make sure that that's the case, suing third parties to keep them off the ballot. I'm sure that some people who watch this are probably going to be angry to hear me talk about third-party candidates. They're probably thinking about Ralph Nader. I don't want to get off on a tangent, but I'll just say if you're thinking of the number 576 votes in relation to Ralph Nader, you need to remember that that is not necessarily an accurate number. We have no idea what the actual count was there. Catherine Harris stopped it when that was the count, but we never finished the count. And the Supreme Court backed her up on that. Jeb Bush's Secretary of State. So George Bush ended up winning. Besides which, if Gore had won his home state, it would not have come down to Florida. And he would have been the first person to win the presidency without winning his home state had he won Florida. So, the other thing is, 10 times as many Democrats voted for Bush as voted for Nader, based on the ballots we did get counted. So, if you're gonna get mad at people in Florida for voting for the wrong person, you should probably talk to some of those Democrats that voted for George Bush, as opposed to the ones that voted for Nader, since the things that Nader's been saying, frankly, are the things that the Democratic Party should have been doing. And he said at the time that he would drop out if he took the issues seriously. He represented a constituency that has not been served for decades. And the Democratic Party has not only not tried to embrace those policies, they've treated those voters as their own property. The assumption is if they choose to vote for somebody else because the Democrats don't do anything at all to try to earn their vote, that we're somehow treasonous or something. It's wild. It's absolutely wild. So, I think it's important to keep in mind how we got into this position. And I think it's also important to ask whether or not this issue of age is something of a red herring. And the answer to that is yes. And I'm going to answer both of those questions at the same time, how we got here and the red herring question. During the 2020 primary, Joe Biden made a promise to be a transitional president. And people were asking him about his age when he made that promise, but it wasn't just about age. Remember, his opponent at that time was Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders is also a baby boomer, so you have to ask yourself, why were people concerned about, the generational resentment of having Biden be the candidate, but that was not going to be a problem if Bernie had been the candidate. Okay? Think about it. Biden made that promise to appeal to the constituency that he was the weakest in, which was the 35 and unders, who were 70 or 80% for Bernie at that point. I think that's also the same debate where he announced he was going to choose a woman as his VP. So, that's a little bit tricky, a little bit gimmicky, to make these kinds of promises in debates that don't necessarily have that much meaning. The symbolism of picking a woman to be your VP is nice, but symbolism is just symbolism. Women can endorse ill-conceived policies just as easily as men can. So, I don't think it's that meaningful. I just think it gets a lot of headlines, and I think that it was successful as far as the way Joe Biden used it, but it's not substantive in any way. And the voters that want substance, just view that as more chicanery, I have to say. So, I mean, the fact is, our system is kind of dumb, right? So, with the Electoral College, over the years, fewer and fewer states have ended up mattering. Anybody who lives in a state that routinely goes for one party or the other by 10 or more points, basically is made completely irrelevant by the Electoral College. Whether you're a conservative living in a conservative state, or a liberal living in a conservative state, or a liberal or progressive living in a blue state, etc., etc., because they just don't even bother campaigning to you. I live in New York State. New York, California together represent like 19% of the country's population, but we get totally ignored, absolutely ignored during the presidential campaign, both in terms of the primary and in terms of the general. And for years now, it has basically been a process whereby if there is a progressive candidate, they are, schemed against with all kinds of dirty tricks, many of which are exactly the things that Democrats complain that Republicans do, right? Like purging voters. I was purged in the 2016 primary, which I'm still very, very, very bitter for. I mean, I'm genuinely pissed off about that at this point. I am rambling a little bit, but the fact that I brought up 2016 and my experience of having been purged makes me remember that we really need to go into the specifics of the primary in 2020 and the primary in 2016. So, Biden made that promise to be a transitional candidate when it was down to him and Bernie. But remember how it got down to him and Bernie, right? The first couple of states, Biden did terribly in. Bernie did very well. Buttigieg did pretty well. I think maybe either Harris or Klobuchar did pretty well in one of them. I don't remember for sure. The point is, Biden had all but been demolished. And going into South Carolina, he had no ground game. He had very little money in his campaign coffers. He had a skeletal campaign staff. Mostly what he had was Jim Clyburn's endorsement. So he wins in South Carolina, and all of a sudden, it becomes a race for the establishment to try to get everybody to coalesce around him for some reason before the next primary, which is like Tuesday. So Saturday, I believe, was when the South Carolina primary was. Could have that wrong. And then the next Tuesday was when the Nevada primary was, just a few days later. So between Saturday and Tuesday, a race that had previously had like 6 people in it, ended up going down to 3 because Obama and Biden sat together and called up all of the centrist candidates who were still in the race and did a horse trade with them to drop out in exchange for what was reported was cabinet positions, and they had to drop out and endorse Biden and get their, in an effort to get their voters to back him as opposed to Bernie. And all of this is always done with the assumption that they're the ones, the institutionalists and the centrists are the ones that are not, pie in the sky. They're the realists. They're the hard-bitten realists who really know how the sausage is made, and they really know how it is inside the Beltway, and they really know that sometimes you just have to make concessions to the corporations and the lobbyists to get things done, which, of course, makes no bloody fucking sense if you actually look at the way our system is supposed to work, but that's what they say. It's just all this condescending gaslighting, endlessly. Bad faith bullshit. It's not quite as ripe or as toxic or as in your face or as aggressive as it is the way the right wing does it, but it's enough of the same thing that it's really quite insulting to have it come from people who are supposed to be, you know, your fellow Democrats, you know. It's really frustrating. So, you know, between the South Carolina primary and the Nevada primary, all these people drop out. Some of them keep their original seats. Some of them end up being in the cabinet. And then when they have the debate, Biden makes the promise to have a woman as his vice president, and he says he's going to be a transitional candidate. But they're only, like I said, they're really only asking Biden. And why are they doing that? They're doing that because Bernie already has the youth vote. It's Biden that needs the youth vote. And Bernie was, you know, an old white man, you know, with, I mean, nothing about his aesthetics says youth culture, but that doesn't matter, you know. It was his genuineness and the fact that he backed policies that were supported by the part of the base that had been ignored for decades at that point. That's why people were so excited about him, because it was actually a candidate who was talking about the stuff that people always talk about, the stuff that gets 70% support, that for some reason, you know, the institutionalist, you know, status quo Dems never, ever, ever want to talk about. They always say, you know, they just trot out all the same bullshit arguments that the Republicans say, and it's frustrating. So that was 2020. And 2020 honestly was even worse than it would have been in a vacuum, because it followed 2016. And I understand that there's probably some people that are watching this video that are saying, you know, if Bernie was so popular, he would have won. Well, you know what? That's kind of like saying that about Jamal Bowman. I mean, you saw what happened with Jamal Bowman in this race that we just had. He was beaten by a candidate who kind of came out of nowhere, total AstroTurf. You know, it was the corporate Dems working together with groups like AIPAC, who are totally against any of the kind of ideological concerns that Democrats are usually, you know, supposed to be prioritizing. But those corporate Dems know how the sausage is made, and apparently they think Jamal Bowman doesn't. And so, since he took a stand on this issue, AIPAC will go against him, so they partner with AIPAC. That's the kind of shit that the corporate Dems and the status quo Dems have been pulling for fucking years. And the fact is, sometimes when I hear the MAGAs talk about the Uniparty, I cringe, but other times I'm like, you know what? There's some truth to this. You know, when you see people who are supposed to be members of your party, you know, eschewing the concerns of not only progressive voters, but progressive officials, siding with Republicans, siding with corporations and lobbyists, you know, when they go to negotiate their signature legislation, they preemptively capitulate somehow to the demands of the corporations. And that's supposed to be the explanation for why we can't have a single-payer healthcare option? I mean, come on, really? It's so condescending, and it's gotten old, which is why nobody wants to just allow the gaslighting about Biden's competency to fly, right? We've been gaslighted enough, and we've been taken for granted enough, and the fact is, I think it's going to be very, very difficult for Biden to make people see him as anything other than completely emblematic of the system and the status quo. And this is what I can see Democrats doing to lose the election and handing it to Trump. If somehow he can grab the mantle of reform, which of course is utter bullshit, but he'll just market the hell out of it, and all the MAGAs will repeat whatever he tells them to repeat. But as we know, this is an election because of our stupid system that's going to be decided based on a tiny little number of votes in half a dozen states. So if enthusiasm is low on the left and Biden is doing everything he can to alienate core groups of voters, of which there are several, being completely feckless in dealing with Netanyahu, sending more and more weapons all the time, shining everybody on about the Palestinians, it's really difficult to take the Democrats seriously when they make pro-democracy arguments about Ukraine or even this country in relation to Trump and Project 2025, when you absolutely do not seem to hold those views when it comes to progressives in your own party or when it comes to Palestinians. I'm just trying to keep it real with you. I'm still gonna vote for Democrats. But since I live in New York, where my vote doesn't matter because of the Electoral College, I'm not voting for Biden. It's not going to make any difference whatsoever. He's still going to win New York by 30%, probably. But the one advantage, the one benefit that the Electoral College gives me is that since my vote doesn't matter, I can not be strong-armed into voting for someone that I see as not fit to hold the office. And that's the long and the short of it. I say that with respect. He was never the right guy. The party shoehorned him in against the will of the voters when there was obviously a popular candidate in Bernie Sanders. And the fact that they have sided over and over again with the corporations against the voters has just really worn out all the good faith of so many people. And honestly, people who are really engaged often complain about the people who don't vote, and frankly, I'm a little irritated by that too, because as unfair as our system is, as badly in need of genuine reform as our system is, I can understand, why they get frustrated, but we have to use every tool at our disposal, and that's honestly the real solution. Number one, we need to get a candidate that's at least got a base level chance, and that is not Biden, like it or not. Harris would not have been my choice if this was the 2020 primary, but given the fact that she's been the vice president and it would make the campaign finance issues a little bit smoother to deal with, I think that those are all very much in her favor. And then, of course, there are the ways that it would be, historic to have her become president, which is something that would be very easy for a lot of voters on the left to get behind. Most of the people who would genuinely have a problem with a person of color being president, or with a woman of any race or a woman of color being president, aren't voting for Democrats anyway, so I don't think we have to worry all that much about that. And I think any centrists who are concerned about that can probably have their fears assuaged by her stepping up to the top spot, not just in the campaign, but in the White House now. Because the truth is, we need a president who can be engaged in doing the job more than a few hours a day. And I say that respectfully, and I'm not just throwing that word out. I don't think I have, what it takes to campaign to be president. I don't think I have what it takes to do the job of president. I certainly don't have what it takes to do the job of being president and campaigning at the same time. But the truth is, I don't think Joe Biden does either, and I think most Americans don't think he does either. And it's very, very difficult to listen to Democrats make the pro-democracy argument, not only with the hypocrisy, but with the just continued gaslighting and just total refusal to look at reality. It's sad that it has come to this, and the fact is, this is not ideal timing. It would have been better to talk about this earlier. People did try to bring it up, but they were responded to by gaslighting, more gaslighting, more gaslighting, and always some condescension. So anyway, I haven't told my 2016 story, but this video is already long enough, and I think I've already got my point across. But there is one other thing that I do want to talk about. In that 2020 primary, there was an interesting bit of data that I kept seeing come up, and I think it's something that would be illuminating when thinking about this split between the people who wanted Bernie or Elizabeth Warren and the people who wanted Biden or Buttigieg or Harris or Klobuchar in the 2020 primary. These two groups repeatedly came up as giving different, as kind of sorting themselves into two different groups, which was the people who were voting for centrist candidates routinely gave their top priority as beating Trump. And the people who were voting for progressive candidates always said progressive policy priorities. And it always struck me as kind of stupid from a tactical perspective to ignore the people who want the progressive policy positions and condescend to them, tell them they don't know what's really going on, tell them that they're just silly, the earth is not really going to, have a climate catastrophe, don't worry, we can vote, for the use of force in Iraq, we can do all these things, we can vote to send, manufacturing overseas, and, it's just one bad move after another these centrist Dems have made, and all the while, there have been progressive Dems who have been trying to get these other Democrats to at least incorporate a little bit of our point of view. If you're going to assume that we're going to vote for you and you're going to get all pissy and indignant when you get criticized by us for, your failure to take our advice or even consider it, I don't know, it's just such an unhealthy relationship, and I think that this whole debate over Biden is perfectly emblematic of the fact that, there are millions of voters in this country that have totally given up on the Democratic Party doing anything at all for them, and that's a shame. If the Democrats would respond to the actual concerns of the voters instead of trying to shoehorn in a candidate that the corporations approve of, for fear that the banks are all going to go and throw their support behind somebody like Trump, well, whatever. It's better to have the support of the people than the support of the banks. And the fact that it's been more important to them to have the support of the banks than the support of the people is why people talk about the Democrats the way they do. And it really should not be a surprise to hear any of this. The real solution is reform, is to make it impossible for Trump to outflank whoever the candidate is for the Democrats on the left on the reform issue. Project 2025, he's backing away from it. They're saying now Agenda 47, which is just this series of videos that he did, some of which overlap very well with Project 2025. But we all know, no matter what he says, Project 2025 is his plan. So, the thing is, he's going to spin whatever it is that he's got going on as reform, as anti-establishment, as the antidote to the establishment. Biden is the most establishment guy the Democrats could possibly have running as their candidate. It is the worst choice we could make when everything in this country is screaming out for change. And Kamala Harris is pretty establishment too, but she's younger, she's more agile policy-wise, she's certainly more agile in terms of campaigning. She would be able to prosecute the case in a very literal sense, having been a prosecutor. And I think despite the things about her that, the left flank of the Democratic base might complain about, I think that they would be relieved to have somebody who's capable of, fully campaigning and really taking the fight to Trump, as opposed to the way it is now, and that they would be happy to throw their support behind Kamala Harris on that level. I think if you actually wanted to get people excited and get turnout to be high and get enough senators and members of Congress to actually engage in reform, like of the Supreme Court, the only way you're going to do that is if there is a people-led, bottom-up, pro-reform movement. And frankly, this is what I've been saying for a couple of years, although I haven't been saying it here. So, I've got a lot of ideas about that, but this video is already long enough, so I'm not going to go into them. I'll just say I will talk more about that stuff later. But Democrats need to embrace progressive policies overall. They need to embrace a change ticket. They need to embrace the idea of systemic reform, because the fact is, even if they do win the White House, even if they win the Senate and the House, the Supreme Court in the last several years, the Roberts Court, has made rulings that get us a very long way toward Project 2025, even without Trump. And the only solution to that, no matter who the president is, even if we get lucky in every possible way as far as this coming election, is we need to have another constitutional convention. And I know that's probably going to sound extreme, and I know there are even some people on the right who call for that with a kind of menacing posture, which is not my intention at all. It's well overdue. So to close, I just want to read a couple of quotes by Thomas Jefferson. This is a letter that he wrote in July of 1816 to Samuel Kercheval. The first quote is, "But inequality of representation in both houses of our legislature is not the only Republican, small r, Republican heresy in this first essay of our revolutionary patriots at forming a constitution. For let it be agreed that a government is Republican in proportion as every member composing it has an equal voice in the direction of its concerns, not indeed in person, which would be impractical beyond the limits of a city or small township, but by representatives chosen by himself and responsible to him at short periods, and let us bring to the test of this canon every branch of our Constitution." And then later he says, "Some men look to constitutions with sanctimonious reverence." Sorry, I was not able to read my handwriting for a moment. Let me start that again. "Some men look at constitutions with sanctimonious reverence and deem them like the Ark of the Covenant, too scared to be touched. They ascribe men of the preceding age a wisdom more human and supposed what they did beyond amendment." This is so pointedly critical of the things that the Roberts Court has done lately. I just thought it was remarkable. And then the reason I went looking for this letter was because one of the quotes that's at the Jefferson Memorial is from it, and I've always loved it. And those two quotes I just read are earlier in the letter, and then eventually he gets to this part, which is what is in the memorial. So some of you may have seen that. It says, "I am not an advocate for frequent changes in laws and constitutions, but laws and institutions must go hand in hand with the progress of the human mind. As that becomes more developed, more enlightened, as new discoveries are made, new truths discovered, and manners and opinions change, with change of circumstances, institutions must advance also to keep pace with the times. We might as well require a man to wear still the coat which fitted him when he was a boy, as civilized society to remain even under the regime of their barbarous ancestors." I think it's pretty clear that our system has not kept up with the progress of of our society the way it should. And I think a lot of the discord and the division and the problems that we have around our political system and our government come from how unrepresentative it is. We have, over the course of time, expanded the definition of what makes a person a citizen of this country, who gets the full rights of citizenship, who gets the full benefits of citizenship. You know, it was only a little more than 100 years ago that people who had, you know, physical forms like mine were finally, after a 70-year struggle, awarded the right to vote. Women worked themselves to death for the right to vote. And when I hear people frustrated about the fact that voting does nothing, I think about those women. It's very upsetting to think that the Democrats are just gonna piss it all away for a vanity campaign, so that Biden can feel like he, you know, didn't give up. That's just not acceptable with what's on the line. Even if the Democrat wins, we have so much work ahead of us. And if the Democrat loses, I don't even want to think about it. So, President Biden, this is what I would say if I was able to speak to him. The most patriotic thing you could do is get out of the way. The way the 2020 primary went was not okay. Officials thinking they know better than the voters is not okay. And I think it's clear that Thomas Jefferson sort of agreed with us several decades after the founding, even though he probably would not have agreed with me about how broadly those rights and privileges should be granted as far as the kinds of people who should get them, even though he's speaking about everybody who's in the society being represented. I'm afraid that we would probably be in different places on that. But since he's a barbarous ancestor, that's okay. Let's not try to wear the coat of our barbarous ancestors. Let's get our shit together, form a pro-democracy coalition, and use the lessons of past movements to shore up our rights in the wake of the destruction wrought by the Roberts Court. And in the process of building this pro-reform movement, it will energize the left in the way that the insiders would like it to be energized. Enthusiasm actually does matter. I know you guys like to say, you know, people going to rallies doesn't matter, people going to polls matters. Sure, right. And people can follow somebody from state to state and show up at the same person's rally over and over again. That's all obvious. But enthusiasm does actually matter, and pretending it doesn't is more gaslighting that is not appropriate, especially considering how likely it is to be close and how many constituencies have voiced disappointment about Biden's first term and their reluctance to vote for him unless either the Biden administration starts doing things differently or it's a different candidate. So those are the really only two options. Either Biden himself needs to start doing a 180 on a whole bunch of things like COVID, like Gaza, or he needs to get the hell out of the way and give us a clean slate at the very least so that we got a fighting chance. Yeah, that's it. I'm gonna be making more videos about trying to put together a pro-democracy coalition and the ways that I think that could work and be effective. And I will try to get videos up faster in the coming weeks. Anyway, I hope everybody is doing okay despite all the tumult. And yeah, take it easy.